I just finished playing Assassin's Creed 3 for the first time in 2023, and I went into the game with very low expectations as I'd heard a lot of negative things about the game. When the game first came out, I heard that it was quite disliked and people didn't really like the game because they just followed the same formula that they'd had before other games at that point, and people were getting sick of the Assassin's Creed formula, which we can see now has not really done anything to deter the creators of the franchise in stopping and actually restarting the franchise. But anyway, going into the game, I had very low expectations and I didn't really expect anything that was that great, something that could live up to the Ezio games or many of the other Assassin's Creed games that I really enjoy, like Assassin's Creed Unity. I just wasn't really that excited to play the game, and surprisingly, which was a pleasant surprise of course, I ended up really enjoying the game. And so I just wanted to give some thoughts about the game that I have at the moment and why I think it's still worth playing in 2023. When talking about the story of this game, I want to cut it up into a few different segments so I know what I'm talking about and I don't go too off topic and rant about one certain specific thing about the game's story. First, I'm going to talk about the setting, and this setting was actually really interesting. The setting here is the American War of Independence / the American Revolution, that sort of thing, and before playing the game, I really had no interest in that sort of history. I do like a lot of history elements, especially the world wars and other things such as the French Revolution, so I do enjoy researching and looking around about all these different historical events, but the American Revolution or the American War of Independence definitely never really interested me, and as someone that's not an American, it wasn't something I really was accustomed to even learning or even looking at. But I was actually quite taken aback by all the interesting things that was happening during this setting. There's a lot of things going on. I knew it was quite complicated, but I didn't really understand the complexity of it, and this game kind of showed me, and I like the perspective the game gave you in order to see all these different events playing out from all different sides. And I found it really interesting that the game chose to show different sides of this conflict instead of sticking to one singular side, and I think that really benefited the game and helped expand the setting and make it more interesting, as I was able to see what the British were doing, what the Americans were doing, and it was all quite interesting to see played out. And I think with that we can talk about the characters of the game. For starters, the protagonist of the game is actually quite interesting. Some people in the community think he's quite stoic and doesn't really have any emotion or doesn't have anything too much to his character rather than just being a two-dimensional character, but I think he's quite an interesting character, especially if you play the side mission. These missions, known as homestead missions, also help to delve his character outwards, showing you more into his character, the emotions he feels, the monologues he feels, and he is quite a slow talking and quite a stoic character. He doesn't talk much, so you don't really get to see his character fleshed out as you did in the manner of some character like Ezio, where he's always talking. He's a talkative character and you really get to see everything with him in the main story. But with Connor, you've got to play the game, see the main story, see these homestead missions, these side missions, and see his character slowly fleshed out. As well as Connor being super interesting, I also found the dynamic he had with Haytham quite interesting. Haytham is the character you play with for about 3 or 4 hours of the game at the start, and although a lot of people complain about this opening section of the game, this prologue, although it is quite long and some of it could be cut down to make it a bit more cohesive and flow better, I really did enjoy seeing the Templar side of things, and the fact that we get to play as Haytham and then eventually see the dynamic he has with his son as we're playing with his son. It's quite interesting to see played out, and I really enjoyed the perspective Ubisoft took, and I think it's quite unique and wasn't done at the time for an Assassin's Creed game, taking both the Templar and the Assassin route. And the dynamic with Haytham and Connor showed that there wasn't just one right side in this conflict between the Templars and the Assassins as we'd been shown for the last few games. Instead, it's a super interesting and complex dynamic between the Templars and the Assassins and what they're both fighting for, and I'm really happy that the game delved into it like it did while using both two protagonists such as Haytham and Connor in order to show the merits of both sides. As well as this, I really like that Connor is a native as well, as we get to see the traditional perspectives of the Native Americans, which is something not many video games delve into, and the only video game that I can remember that delves a bit into the native lifestyle and what they're about and their perspective is Red Dead Redemption 2, but it's only for a short while. But the fact that Assassin's Creed 3 takes the route of showing what the perspective of the natives is all about is really interesting and helped flesh out Connor's character as well as the setting of the game as well. In addition to that, having this dynamic with George Washington, for example, and all these different historical figures was something really interesting. I really like how they just didn't glorify George Washington as is shown in a lot of American media. Instead, they showed that he was a man with flaws and that he did do things that were wrong. For example, in the game, they show him attacking or planning to attack the natives, of which is really interesting because usually they show George Washington in a light that can't be attacked by anything. So I found that perspective quite interesting, and I like the conversations between him and Connor and Haytham, and it's quite interesting to see the dynamic of them playing playing out, as well as we're trying to help George Washington, but we eventually see that not everyone is completely pure in nature and that everyone has flaws. And that's why I really like the character of Charles Lee. I didn't really expect him to be the main antagonist, and I don't know if I'd even call him the main antagonist. That goes to him or Haytham, but Haytham, you don't really feel that antagonistic force towards him because you're shown the perspective of his son going against him, so it's a bit more different, and you played as him for the first 4 hours. But Charles Lee is quite an interesting character. He has different ideologies to that of George Washington, and seeing them both conflict between who is the rightful leader of this new revolution, of this new America, of this new land, is quite interesting as well. And I like the hunt for Charles Lee, although it was quite long. I really did enjoy hunting for him and taking down the Templar slowly. I think we can kind of wrap up with saying that the Animus parts as well, although I do not like them in any Assassin's Creed game, I'm not interested in the Animus parts at all for these games. I just can't really get into it. I don't really understand what's going on, and especially in this game it was quite confusing with Juno and Minerva and all these different things happening within the Animus, but it was quite interesting to say the least. I did enjoy the missions in the Animus and they were quite fun to play out. I liked killing all the different guards in the modern day world with Desmond after all these different skills he's learned from these years of playing as an assassin or playing through the ancestors' memories. It's really interesting to play as Desmond, and the Animus parts were quite interesting and well fleshed out, although I wouldn't really recommend playing the game based on that merit, and it wasn't my favorite part of the story in any measure. Overall, the story in Assassin's Creed 3 is quite well written, and I was pleasantly surprised by this writing as well, especially after all the negative things I'd heard about the game, and it was a pleasant surprise to have a pretty good story for Assassin's Creed, and I really did end up enjoying the story, and I really wish there was more to Connor's character in different games or whatever, but I guess we're never really going to see a continuation of his story, sadly. I don't have too much interesting things to say about the gameplay of this game because, to be completely honest, it doesn't stray too far away from the Ezio games. There's no core differences between this game and the Ezio games, and they're quite similar in the way that their stealth works, that the combat works, that the parkour works. Everything here feels quite the same. You can definitely tell that the framework was already built for making this game, and it's taken away from the Ezio games, and there's not too much different things that has happened or innovated upon that formula that has really made it stand out amongst the other Assassin's Creed games. And for me, I'm completely alright with that, especially with the notion of if it ain't broke, don't fix it, as we've seen with other games such as God of War and God of War Ragnarok, which although God of War Ragnarok does add some elements to the gameplay, much of it is the same, especially the enemy design and things like that. Even the level design is quite similar to that of God of War 2018, but it's the story and the different things that happens within that story and the characters that really fleshes out and differentiates God of War Ragnarok from its predecessor. And in the same vein, I think that Assassin's Creed 3 also does that. However, I can see the complaints because you'd had Assassin's Creed 1, 2, Brotherhood, Revelations, and now you had 3, and they all kind of use the same formula, although they did build upon each other. And especially Assassin's Creed to Brotherhood, you can see that little bit of innovation that spiced up the gameplay, and especially in Revelations as well. And it's kind of here in this game as well, although to a lesser extent that Assassin's Creed 2 did to Revelations, for example. But I do really enjoy the combat and the stealth and the parkour here. The combat is still super fun to play. I know that they changed the formula of the Assassin's Creed combat because people were saying it got repetitive and boring, although I've really enjoyed the combat throughout all the Assassin's Creed games I've played, and I really do enjoy that Ezio era combat, and I really enjoyed it in this game as well. What I liked most about that Ezio era combat is the customization with the different weapons, the tools, and the things that you have at your disposal that mixes up the gameplay and the combat. Being able to switch from a huge boarding axe to a sword to a tomahawk, all these different weapons and variants allow for more complexity in the combat, and I feel like when I switched weapons I was completely changing the flow of combat, and I can see why others might not feel the same, but for me the combat here was just so fluid, so nice to play, and I really did enjoy going into fights throughout the entirety of the game, and even towards the end I was going into as much fights as I could because I really did enjoy the combat that much. As well as this, the stealth is also really good. If you're looking for the Ezio era sort of stealth, you've got that right here, and you've got the same tools such as the rope dart, you've got the poison darts, the smoke bombs. These all make the stealth component of the game really fun, and when you pair this with the parkour that works pretty well most of the time, I think the parkour here is quite good and it flows pretty well, and especially when you got into the groove of things, it felt quite good to just jump from building to building as you would in any other Assassin's Creed game, and it flowed quite well as well. Although there was a few hiccups where many people do say these about the Ezio era games in general, the character just sometimes doesn't do what you want it to do, and it's really frustrating, especially when you're trying to do some escape or trying to do something cool with the combat. Sometimes you're deterred from being able to do that due to the character just not listening to the instructions that you're doing with the controller, and that was quite frustrating at times. But there was less of those hiccups than there was in other games such as Assassin's Creed 2 or Brotherhood, and that's to be expected because this game did try to evolve or make the mechanics a bit more easier and flow better than it did in the other games. I think one more thing I can add is that the variety in the missions was quite good as well. I really did enjoy those cannon sequences, for example, from Assassin's Creed Brotherhood, and you've got a few of that where you have to defend the Patriots, for example, and you're shooting all these different cannon fire towards the enemy. I really did enjoy those type of missions. There is only a few trading missions which I'm really happy about. I hate every single trading mission in any Assassin's Creed game, and there was a limited number of them in this game which I really did enjoy as well. And all the different sequences such as controlling the soldiers, for example, where you tell them when to fire, was actually really interesting. I like these different variety within the combat sequences of the game and the different mission variety as well. Overall, the gameplay here is quite fantastic, and exploring the beautiful world of America in this time, in Boston, in New York, in all these different areas was quite fun to do, and I really do enjoy the gameplay of Assassin's Creed 3, and I recommend anyone play it based on this merit alone. Well, to wrap up, I think you can tell I really did enjoy Assassin's Creed 3, and I was pleasantly surprised by the game's quality and all in the game, and I really did enjoy the story, the gameplay, everything about the game was quite well made and quite fantastic, and was definitely contrary to my expectations when going into the game. And I recommend for anyone that hasn't already played the game to check out this game, especially if you love those Ezio era games, and this is quite a fantastic Assassin's Creed game overall, and I recommend to those who have already played it to try it out again, especially if you didn't already like it. And although it doesn't stray too far away from the formula of the Ezio games, it's still quite well made and a good package overall. Anyway, that's all from me for today's video. Hope you all enjoyed, and I'll see you all in the next one. Peace.